new vaccine analysis reveals 300,000 excess U.S. deaths, $147 billion in damages. We are living in one of the most revealing years of our lifetime, particularly when it comes down to glorious life-saving COVID-19 vaccine. But just how life-saving is it, or was it? Time reveals all, as research continuously points to the vaccine's ineffectiveness, especially how it was initially sold to Americans. Recent data keeps exposing its fallacies and fatality. According to researchers behind a new analysis by Human Projects, a wing of Portugal-based research from Finance Technologies, and the U.S. COVID-19 vaccines injured 26.6 million people, disabled 1.36 million people, and caused 300,000 excess deaths. The economic cost of damages resulted in $147 billion in 2022 alone. Researchers behind vaccine damage projects said they ought to estimate the human costs, including deaths caused or hastened by the vaccines, as well as the impact of the overall economy of each aspect of the vaccine damage. So if you go a little lower, this is from Edward Dowd. We had him on a couple months ago.
A couple months ago, Ed Dowd.
So he shows the numbers at the top, estimated human cost. Estimated economic cost, injuries, $89.9 billion, disabilities, $52.2 billion, excess death, $5.6 billion, but go all the way to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, all the way to the bottom, all the way to the, right there, okay, right there on that tweet right there. Pfizer and Moderna in 2022 combines COVID-19 vaccine revenue in the U.S. of $11.5 billion. So for every $1 they made, it cost the U.S. economy $13. Jesus. Quite the negative societal ROI, largest crime scene in history. Multiply this across the globe. Numbers. Now, you have to know that this research is coming from this organization. You have to go test the research. You have to go do your own due diligence on this to see where it's at. But Ed Dowd is also a data guy. He's done very well for himself. And he went from being a financial guy to wanting to study all the statistics, wrote a book about it, and boom. Everybody wants to talk about it and read about it. But here's the question. I asked this because we went down this rabbit hole with COVID. And we thought, oh, my God, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be great. A New York Post story came up that said, with the expert COVID view blown up, green terror must be next. Okay, this just came up a month ago. I'm sure you've seen the story. It is necessary to consider with the arguments of courageous skeptics like Bjorn Lomborg and others who have long documented the disconnects from reality in the climate change discourse. Despite the alarming predictions of climate catastrophes, many of these forecasts have been consistently off the mark. For example, at the 2021 Glasgow UN Climate Summit, John Kerry claimed we have now only 9 years left to stop global warming. That's pathetic to even say something like that. This followed Prince, now King, Charles, 2019 claimed that we had only 18 months left, and AOC claimed the same year that we had only 12 years left. At least she's more optimistic. These predictions conflict with the 2004 prediction with the British Greens that climate change would destroy all human civilization by 2020. Thank God we're still around. Additionally, the climate refugees prediction has been repeatedly overblown. In 2005, the United Nations Environment Program forecasted that 50 million climate refugees would be created by 2010, but this massive migration flow failed to materialize. The proposed solutions, such as banning gas stoves, mandating Teslas, and eating mealworms, are nonsensical and cater to the emotions of rich progressives rather than addressing the actual risk of climate change. So this is the part where the average person is sitting there who doesn't have all day, all night, doesn't get paid to do research. They have a family, they have a wife, they have kids, they have a husband, they have a job, they have responsibilities, they have things they want to do. They want to take care of their health. They want to increase their financial situation in a better place. But they're trying to reason and say, okay, Mr. Expert, Mrs. Expert, okay, government, you're here to help us. Every time you do, I'm a little bit worried and paranoid. Why was it that COVID, that was supposed to be so beneficial for us to go do all this stuff with vaccines, now everybody's turning around and not looking good, especially the experts? If that's the case, you asked for all this money. Why should we trust you with, climate change? Maybe you're using the same, method to get money out of us and use fear tactics to get us to fall for this crap. Do you see the credibility why the same people that don't trust the COVID argument now are having a hard time saying, is this the next thing?
Oh, absolutely. So, Patrick, I'm the kind of guy that will read the UN Climate Panel report and actually mostly believe that the climate scientists are doing good work. But some of their policy recommendations are not very good. I would probably do the same with the COVID. I'm not. I should just say I'm not a COVID expert whatsoever. But I know a lot of these people. Fundamentally, I probably don't. I would tend to not agree with the whole idea that vaccines were a terrible sort of scam. But it was very clear that we were being told in the COVID conversation that this is going to be the end of mankind. We need to do drastic things. And one of the drastic things we did, which a lot of people were already skeptical about when we did them, was to close our schools. We now know that that was a terribly bad idea in so many different ways. So the World Bank has shown that it basically costs a lot of kids a year or more of their education around the world, and this makes kids everywhere poor. The World Bank estimate it will cost the world about $1.4 trillion per year starting in 2040 because these kids will now be out in the employment market. And they will be less productive because they just lost a year of schooling around the world. This is terrible. And we knew back then. What that tells you is we need to have a less biased conversation. We need to have a conversation where it's allowed to say, wait a minute, is that a good idea? And that was not allowed because we're so panicked in the COVID conversation. And likewise, we seem to be so panicked in the climate conversation that we often don't ask the same question. So I absolutely agree with you. We need to ask these questions. And I think a lot of experts seem to just jump on this one solution. No, the solution, no matter what the problem is, the solution is always solar panels and wind turbines, no matter what you ask. And that's probably not correct. It's a little part of the solution, but it's not a very large part of it.
Can I challenge something you said respectfully? Please. You just said let's have
you can also do it unrespectfully.
No, damn. Well, within arm's reach of you, I'll do it respectfully. Okay. You say let's have a less biased, discussion. How do you do that when so many of these scientific things inevitably become political, and political has policy, and policy's usually got two sides of the aisle, regardless of the country you're in? Because in politics, I think we can agree, boogeymen get created. Each side creates the boogeyman, and then they can control the outcome, which leads to policies and benefactors. In the case of COVID was a boogeyman. The control was masking and civic controls. Policies got put in place for education. The benefactor, now we turn out billions and billions of dollars went to pharmaceutical companies and others. That's always where it is. How do you have a less biased discussion on this? This is my question for you and my challenge to you, because you yourself have twice been part of not good-natured, but good, logical attempts to create like the Copenhagen consensus, the Australian consensus, and both of those failed. How do we have a less biased conversation on this?
I should just say Copenhagen consensus hasn't actually failed yet, at least.
No. Should I say that
yes.
They didn't come to consensus? There was an awful lot of shouting.
Yes. Oh, God, yes. So anyway, you're absolutely right. And look, I may be a little...
Pollyannic?
Yeah, well, or naive or hopeful. I tend to believe that when you work with people who disagree with you a lot, it's worthwhile to be polite, and it's worthwhile to try to sort of engage them in polite conversation, because it also makes all the people who listen in much more likely to say, oh, maybe he has an argument. And so I agree with you that it is hard to get people, especially sort of in the very religious environmental movement, to get them to move. But I think, and that's back to you, Patrick, your point of saying, most people have kids to pick up from school. They have other and more important things to do. And so in some sense, it's about convincing them that there is a problem, for instance, with climate change, but it's not as big as it's been promoted. It's not the end of the world. It's a problem. And many of the solutions are actually quite expensive and will deliver quite little. And having that conversation and having it respectfully, I think, can help make it more likely that many people are going to say, all right, I think that makes some sense. Maybe we should start looking more for where can we get the biggest bang for our buck? What can we actually do? And that, of course, goes back to the whole idea of saying this is all about research. This is about making sure that we find these innovations that'll make the world able to do this at an affordable cost.
Right, because you go back to Al Gore, he created the boogeyman, Inconvenient Truth, and you will jump to Pat and less than 10 seconds here, but we just read here that the Great Barrier Reef, the pictures he showed was a natural life cycle happening on one side, and there was actually a monstrous bloom simultaneously having on the other side. And now the Great Barrier Reef is actually bigger. So what Gore would be accused of, not accused of, but proven, rather selective imagery and editing in building that. And then the polar bears have come back and everything. So people go, oh, well, you said this about COVID, you said this about Inconvenient Truth, and you were wrong, and you were wrong, and you were wrong.
Yeah, he won an Oscar for that.
Correct. And now we look back.
2006, won an Oscar for that.
Well, let's just say
no opinion. We can factually
possibly
say
not the best scientific indicator either.
But the point is, Yusuf, we understand that. I stopped watching the Oscars a long time ago. But this year the movie that won, anyways, I don't even want to get into it. It's very weird what things they do there. But to the average person, being an Oscar award-winning documentary means you kind of know what you're talking about. Yeah. The whole film created media critic collective rating. Rotten Tomatoes was 51% and 61% for Metacritic. If you can go to the article you were just showing a minute prior to this, Rob, which you had on, right there. It says, don't forget the helpless critters Greens love to hype up. Remember the vanishing polar bear, Keystone is Al Gore's moral panic masterpiece and Inconvenient Truth. Turns out their numbers are up from 2.5 to 5 times since the 60s. The allegedly dying coral of the Great Barrier Reef now holds more coral than any time since record keeping began. Yeah, this is where they lose credibility. Yes,
and they should because they're not telling us the full story. Now, remember, again, the polar bears, and I've been pointing this out for quite a while, we have more polar bears than we've had since the 1960s. We have much more. And this is mostly not anything to do with climate change, but because we stopped shooting polar bears. We actually enacted a global treaty back in 1976 where we dramatically reduced the number of polar bears we shoot, which has led happily to the fact that we now have many, many more polar bears. And again, one of the points I try to emphasize is if you actually cared about polar bears and if you wanted to protect them even more, shouldn't we be a little concerned about the fact that this year and every year we shoot about 700 polar bears out of the 26,500 polar bears there are. If you want to do something to help polar bears, instead of not driving tomorrow, maybe you should enact not shooting 700 polar bears. Again, this is not rocket science. And if we can stop having this very, very polarized conversation, we can actually get somewhere with smart, simple policies.
It's interesting here what you're talking about. The agreement on the conservation of polar bears came into effect in May 26th of 1974 in an effort to protect the species through a coordinated approach by the 5 polar bear range states, Russia, Norway, Greenland, Denmark, and U.S. and Canada. 700 a year, 26,000. And now it's what?
No, sorry. We used to shoot about 1,500, and then it went down to 700.
Got it.
And remember, 700 is mostly in Canada because it's Inuit that are allowed to catch them. So it's both caught by Inuit. It's also sold as a trophy hunting and a way to bring in money to the local communities.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.